Alone in the Dark 3, the last in the initial trilogy, was one I got because I really got into the series at that point. And it continued a tradition that they had set up in the series because if you look into the history of the games, they are each set on a specific date or around a specific date. Um, I believe, I'm trying to recall which one the first one's set around. I think it's either the winter solstice or the summer solstice. The second was set at Christmas Eve. The third game is set around 4th of July. And again, each game seemed to work with certain themes. And this one was set in a old west town in which they were set making a movie. And each game also had its own little things that they add in here. While the first one had a whole lot of Cthulhu in it, the second game had a mix of gangsters, pirates, and voodoo. So the third game was embedded with some Native American lore of some sorts, and the undead as well as werewolves, for definite. But I think one of the most chilling things that could be said about Alone in the Dark was its villain, Jeb Stone. Now, Jeb Stone, which was the sort of the founder of the town Slaughter Gulch, had some plans for it. And he, in part, did the number one no-no that most people can think of. He basically dug in graves and found a fortune. And I mean, this is a no-no of the highest caliber. You don't desecrate a grave. And it doesn't matter how high you stand. I mean, you can't fault a dog for digging in a gravesite because it's a dog. They don't necessarily know the reverence of the site. But a human being should know better than to disturb the dead. That's a surefire way to get spirits angry. And when spirits are not resting, they haunt. So, this was a major mistake on their part. Jeb, of course, didn't care. Now, of course, Jeb also had his own secrets. I believe he was raised an orphan. And he is the child of the voodoo priestess in the second game and the main antagonist in the first game. So you got a double helping of nasty in that boy. And he's also, I think, one of the more craftier villains. And I say this with absolute conviction because he's capable of a lot of nasty shit. I think Jack was a bit of a one-trick pony. And I think his name was Pretz. He was sort of stuck to a spot when Carnby fought him. And it was amazing. And it sort of added to it that this game was actually one of the biggest by far of the Alone in the Dark series. I mean, their setup basically takes place inside a house. I mean, Alone in the Dark 1 takes place in their setup, which was basically a house. Alone in the Dark 2 was again in a house, but you had a maze around it, as well as the under part where the pirate ship was. But this time you were dealing with a whole town and an underground mining operation or secret lab. And that was definitely a step up. And this game, just to show its sophistication, actually boasted more save slots than the previous two. Now, I think the previous two were basically at that time when hard drives were becoming the normal spot. And of course, with CD-ROMs also coming available, again, it allowed you to do more. But Alone in the Dark 3 had actually about 24 save slots, 4 sections, which they each named after, I believe, a state. And each section had 6 slots open to it. So you could choose between them. Save more games than you could before in any of the installments. Hey, that's a plus. Because this game was also one of those that was notorious for setting up, if you forget something here, you're screwed. Which means, do one thing wrong and you can cost yourself the game later in the game. Of course, I think they did keep some things from doing that. And this game also featured a lot of, throwbacks to the previous ones. One of the driving factors to get Carnby to go out to Slaughter Gulch to investigate and get involved is his friend Emily Hartwood is there. And this establishes that in the first game, they somehow met one another. I mean, as if, I guess the story goes, they both went to Derceto that night. And their paths basically crossed. Of course, this wouldn't sort of mesh with the tone of the game being alone in the dark. But it helps to establish storyline because you could play as Emily in the first one. Also, you will see hints and nods to the second game. You'll find the photo of Jack and his crew standing nearby the statue in the hedge maze. And there's even a grave for One-Eyed Jack in Slaughter Gulch. Which, how the hell did they know that he was dead? I mean, he died in the previous installment, but the town's been a ghost town since then. Well, of course, this is also a puzzle that requires information to go back on. The game also did a little tongue-in-cheek thing in its opening, you hear Carnby fussing about how the landlords cut the picture. In which you also get a little nod to the name of the series. Yeah, I'm Alone in the Dark. And this actually ran with certain trends. There is a big plan of Jeb Stone to literally wipe out the California coast, the whole state of California. And there's been long talk of California eventually falling into the ocean. Which, if it were to happen, that would be a tremendous loss of life. But Jeb Stone was intent on causing that. In fact, his big plan was to cause it on the 4th of July. So they worked with that old story. And This game also features another one of those odd sections, but in this one, Carnby dies. And dying at the right time allows you to take on a, quote, spirit quest of sorts. As Carnby's soul is transferred into a tiger of sorts, or a cougar of sorts, and now he must go find the very stone that Jeb took from the graves and cast it into a fire. But he has to do so by a certain time, or else, he does die and the game's over. This game also featured a whole slew of very clever enemies. I mean, when you play against, in the previous game, when you played against the foes, well, you had to use some trickery to get past certain parts of them and defeat certain ones. Almost every major villain in this game, you have to use some sort of trick to get past. There's one guy who will only die by raising the hangman's noose. Another guy who can only die because of a golden bullet. Which actually, you can actually not only just fire the bullet, but you can fire, quote, coins at him. And even the end battle, there is a cleverness to it, where you can't directly hurt characters, but you must draw them into a dangerous course. And eventually you then have to deal with Jeb Stone, who's taken another trick up his sleeve. A full suit of armor that no gun can penetrate, so you have to find another way around it. And as the game plays out, you have to do everything carefully and everything just right. And I think this game also features one of the most difficult fights I have ever had to deal with in an Alone in the Dark game, in which you are in such confined quarters with such an overpowered enemy that you have to strike just right in order to be able to survive. And if your health is too low, surviving is a B and a half. No joke. A B and a half, yeah. And it really does make you think things out. And this game is good at that. This series has been very good at that. Giving you abstract clues to determine what is your best course of action. And even some of these clues will help you get through puzzles. And I think that's part of why I enjoyed these games, and especially this one. It was such a rich lore and such a beautifully designed game. It is a shame that the original trilogy didn't become a quadrilogy or anything like that. But as the industry was evolving at that point. And that's all I really have to say about Alone in the Dark 3. Well, I should say one more thing. The game ends with a kick-ass song. And maybe that's why they didn't pursue it even more, although they did start working on some other projects. And who knows, maybe I will get a chance to play one of those other projects in the near future. But that's enough about Alone in the Dark 3. Besides, I've got to save some room. I can't go over everything here because we really should talk about the whole series as a whole. Until next time, This is Rich Kale here on YouTube, Rich Gen X elsewhere, and I hope you've enjoyed this little retrospective on Alone in the Dark 3. And please subscribe to the channel. Take care, all. Bye.